Hello, everyone. So today is the fourth episode of the EM Leaders Council edition of the Analytics India Magazine podcast, Simulated Reality. We are going to be talking of a very relevant topic, which is the evolving nature of data engineering. To speak with us, we have today Sriram Narasimhan, Head of Data and Analytics at Wipro.
Kashyap.
We also have with us Padmakumar Nambiar, or PK, from Oracle, who is the Director of Product Development at Oracle.
Hi, Kishore.
Hello, Sriram. Hi. Okay, so let's dive into it, right? Data engineering as a subject has started to take a lot of data leaders have started taking notice of it, and it has become a buzzword, or probably we have gone beyond buzzwords and we are hiring. What exactly is the role of data engineer, and how has it evolved over the last 10 years? And why do you think suddenly in the last 2 years it has started to gain so much significance? PK?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so just to give a perspective of the context, right, so that it becomes a useful session for people to understand, because why you go to YouTube or you go to social media, you see a lot of stuff on what is data scientist, what is a data engineer versus what is a machine learning. So just to give a perspective, right? So back in 90s, so we had a lot of focus on people getting into software jobs, and then it was only software engineering, right? So basically it was a programmer, but then it was more on software engineering. And then with the advent of data, we got this title of data scientist. So people were generally called as data scientists. But then that's when people realized that, okay, whatever insights that you can build out of a software program, which is essentially based on analytics and stuff like that, is as good as the data that you have, right? So that is when I would think that a lot of focus started coming on board on the importance of data, right? And we talk about the 3 or the 5 V's of data analytics, right? Of data, like volume and variability and stuff like that. So now we have reached a point where people a lot of people are talking about it is not the volume of data that is necessarily important. It is basically the quality of data as well, right? So I think that's when people realize the importance of the quality of the data. Right. So when we say quality, it's basically because how good is the data that you have, so that the insights that you get is actually more and more valuable. Right. Now, to give a real life example, now if you talk to anybody about what is COVID, right, people will have many explanations about what the COVID is, how it is generated, and how it is going to affect people once they get infected with COVID. Right. But then, as human beings, we know that we listen to person A, that is more authentic, rather than we listen to person B or C. It is not so reliable in information. So we human beings, using our brains, perform these inferences in varied ways, right? And so we have to use our judgment to really realize, okay, this is more authentic versus this is not that authentic. Same is the case with ML as well, right? So you have models which are trained on some data. That some data has to be very relevant, very important, and very contextual to that particular problem that you're trying to solve. So that is where the data engineer really comes in. So data engineer, along with the data scientists, along with ML experts or engineers, they need to really be able to come out with what is the data that would actually make a difference to that particular model, right? So I think that is where the relevance of that particular role we see as is increasing day by day, and then
setting the context, basically.
Yeah, that is basically.
He said about setting the context. So why do you think it has become so relevant in the past 2 years? Why not since the data science revolution or whatever it started 10 years back, right?
Yeah, I was about to come to that. That's a great point, Kashyap, right? So what I see is happening in the last few years is that the whole notion about productization of data, right? In the past, what used to happen is you have data in your enterprise systems, you bring it to data warehouses, you build reports, and in about a day or two, you get the insights, right? Now, what's happening is that the data is now here and the context is now on here. So you really need to make sure that you capture data in motion and extract value out of it. And also the relevance of data keeps evolving, right? Uh, if you take, for example, a social media analytics that you want to do, right? Data keeps streaming, it keeps coming in. So you need to build more of a product out of data, what I would call as data products, right? So the data products have features and outcomes, and you keep enriching the features, right? The way you look at data itself changes. Rather than looking at data as tables and rows and columns and reports, you look at building data products with certain features and capabilities that you roll out every 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and 4 weeks, right? So you need to apply engineering principles in terms of how you manage data. That is why I think the data engineer role and the whole notion of data engineer itself has become very relevant. And with the engineering principles being applied, right, and the real-time data management, it has become very hot in the market. That's why I think the last 2 years, more than ever before, building data products has become more important.
Yeah, I think that speaking of this productization, right? Productization can also be associated with scalability, right? Like because there are so many models, ML models that are not. They're just on the shelf. They're not reaching out into the actual public use, right? Productization. I think one of the roles that data engineer plays very well is in terms of scalability or ML ops.
Yeah.
What do you think that the role of a data engineer is in that ML ops cycle?
Yeah, so very, very good question again, right? I would rather probably stretch your question to what I'll call it as an XOps, right? Which is DevOps, Data Ops, and ML Ops, right? Which is what I call as XOps. This is all in one chain. If you look into a stream of manufacturing, right? You used to have DevOps for development of applications. Then we moved to Data Ops, which is building data in motion, and then ML Ops is analytics in motion, right? So back to your question around scalability, you need to build scale out of data over a period of time. You get initial insights, you validate that with test data, and then you expand on whatever you build or hypothesis that you build. Now, what Data Ops does is it has a good cousin on one side on DevOps and another cousin on ML Ops on the other side. With these three coming together, your ability to take a unit of insight, build it, test it, either fail or succeed on it, and then scale it. Data Ops plays that central role in bringing all these things together. Right? I'll just give you a very small example. Right? For one of our clients, back to the COVID example, he said, no, we are building a MLOps solution to say which batch of the vaccines are manufactured the right way, which of these vaccine batches have to be rejected for a pharma company, right? You scan the vaccines that are coming out, and then based on the quality of the scan, you decide whether you have to reject it or not. Now, during the test cycle of this experiment, you test this with about 1,000 vaccine batches, and you build a DevOps and Data Ops solution for this. Now we have to scale this for 1 million batches per day. Right? Now you don't want to build a solution for 1 million batches, fail, and then start over again, because the vaccines have to be rolled out to the public. So here Data Ops and ML Ops and DevOps come together. You build a test module, you scan for about 1,000 vaccine batches, and once you fine tune your ML Ops routine, then you can scale it for about 1 million batches. This is exactly back to your question on scale. In real life, how we successfully implemented a solution for a large pharma company which was able to test a lot of vaccine batches and roll out in a very successful manner.
Okay. Your thoughts on this, PK?
Yeah, sure. I think Sriram, you brought in a right point, right? I mean, basically marrying the different XOps together, right? I think that is a very nice way to correlate this. And just to take that a step ahead, right? So now, scalability actually talks about volume, right? Now, today you have X, tomorrow you might have 2X or 3X, right? So you have to have a solution that actually caters to those growing needs, right? But at the same time, the variability factor also comes in when the volume increases, right? So I would attribute that also to scalability, because if you have a model today, how sure is it that it will perform at the same level of performance, say tomorrow when you have a different set of data or a slightly varied set of data? So that's the reason I would attribute that also
That's
to
a great
the
point. That's a great point.
scalability
Yeah.
part, right? So how do you ensure that your model stays correct, right? That's where the ML ops
Or how you can make small incremental changes to the model.
Exactly.
That's a
Yeah.
great point.
Yeah. So we have techniques like transfer learning and all those, right, with deep neural networks, which actually learns the delta. Like, I mean, we learn from A to Z, and tomorrow we learn from 1 to 9. We don't unlearn A to C, right? But typical mathematical models unlearn A to C. So you have to teach them A to Z plus 1 to 9.
Yeah.
But transfer learning actually helps you to just incrementally learn, right? So those are all like great things that will help in scalability as well.
Correct. I think that's a very interesting point, which actually brings me to my next question, right? There's a one set of data and there's another set of data that is built over it. While there are batches of data that were now produced and then ML models were developed, now the role of a data engineer has come to a point where they have to make this data available real time. So the data is no more put in batches, that the data is put in real time, and I think data engineers play a role in that. But many have said that there's a lot of difficulties that we are currently facing, especially in this thing. What are some of those difficulties, and what are some of the industry, like what are some of the solutions that industries try to come up with to ensure real time data supply to scale models or
Yeah.
develop models?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. It's a tough question as well, right? So the thing is, yeah, there are two aspects to it. One is the difficulty is, I would say, it's a factor of X and Y. X being the data. Do you really get the data that we want? Many a time we are starved for data. We don't get the right data. Not because we just want some data, but it's because we want the right data, right? Even if you Google, so people say that the best way to hide a page is to keep it in the second page onwards, right? So people hardly look at the page 2 onwards in a Google search. You just whatever comes on the first page is what you have, right? So one is you need to get the right data, right? Second is now the tools and techniques that would actually help. Now we talked about real time and batch and all those, right? So we have technologies like Kafka and Apache Storm and Splint and all those, but then instrumenting those, so you have to have the right software engineering expertise that the data engineer would need to work alongside with, right? So that you have those solutions which are more elastic both horizontally and vertically, so that those systems are able to ingest the data as they come in, either in a batch or a micro batch or streaming fashion. And then it's able to ingest those data in a right way, in a very timely way, so that latency is the key, right? I mean, zero latency, we are there, right? So people want everything like yesterday, right? So those are all things that would really be a challenge to the, not just the data engineer per se, but the whole data engineering team, right? Be a data scientist or ML engineer. So how do you actually produce a solution that is giving the response in the right way at the right time, at the right place? And those would be the critical factors.
I'll pick on a very interesting point you said, both the breadth and depth, right? So just what we call as a deep data, you need to query for one specific insight in a big data and breadth of the data as well. So that's what I think there is a challenge, right? In a simplistic terms, if you want to extract it, it is a combination of the use case and the tech stack, which kind of complicates the whole issue around data engineering, right? I'll give you an example again for this, right? One of our credit card clients, when you go and swipe their card, it took about 35-40 milliseconds for them to find a fraudulent transaction. And sometimes it used to time out, right? Now, probably I'm talking pre-COVID times when people used to go to stores. Now it's not an issue. So the challenge there was that can you bring this 30 milliseconds time taken for finding a fraudulent transaction to about 15 milliseconds, right? So that there's no timeout. Timeout has two issues. the client is dissatisfied, and there's a cost of the product as well. Right? Here is a question of deep data challenge. Can you quickly find out running an algorithm whether this is fraudulent transactions or not, and cut down to 15 milliseconds? And back to PK's point, is it the relevant data for me to sign up for that as well? So this is where I think here the use case, if you go back to my point around use case and tech stack, right? Can you find the right tech stack for the right use case in a world where the tech stack constantly evolves, makes the life of a data engineer more difficult, more interesting, and more challenging as well. And that is where I think more the data engineers are more sought after in my mind. Being a data guy, I have a lot more bias towards data guys than the machine learning data science guys. But I think that the life of a data engineer is more difficult and more challenging because you're extracting data and giving it to somebody who can create insights. But I think what is the right tech stack and how to apply a solution for that specific use case, and the use case keeps varying, is where the challenge and the opportunity lies for data engineer.
Correct.
And in this case, we were able to bring it down, the credit card case I said, from 30 to 50 milliseconds with the right combination of tech stack, right? But it took some time for us to choose it.
Yeah.
Right? But once you choose it, the client is super thrilled, right? Because it makes a world of difference to a lot of people.
Yeah. It's a combination of different things coming together.
Yeah,
It can be people, talent, right? Or it could be the technology that you're using.
And the use case as
the
well.
use case as well, right?
Yeah.
Which is this thing. My next question is around the setting up of teams, right? So at the start, we discussed that, the data engineering field is growing in the last 2 years, right? Now, as we see now, if you see data science teams 10 years probably were just one unit separate from this thing, and they were probably helping. Now the lines are thinning.
Blurred.
They are very blurry, right? Even between software engineers or data scientists, right? They are thinning. The same thing happens with data engineers. So my question is, do you think data engineering should be a strictly different unit, or how should it function along? How should it be structured in a way that there is efficient use of the data engineering team to the data science teams? This question comes because from whatever I read, there's a lot of there is a lot of complaints from the data engineering team that our roles are not defined well.
Yeah.
Is it important to define these roles, or should we not define, like how do we structure it?
I think we definitely need to define the role very clearly. And the challenge is also the data space, how it has evolved, right? For a decade, the data space has been a cut and paste generation, right? In terms of how the tools used to work. Now people have to go back to coding, right? So that is where I think there's an unlearning and learning that have to be done by people who have been there in the data space. Now, back to the question of how to set up the role and the team, right? I definitely think that there's a very, if not a very strict definition, a broader definition of what a data engineer will do, and how he or she will go about doing this data engineering work has to be defined pretty clearly, right? When you come to the definition of it, within the data engineering team, typically we go for a pod-based model, which is very popular these days. But you also need people, who can unpack the use case, right? You take a use case as a product feature, unpack into some set of specifications, and then bring engineers who are full stack, who can build end-to-end and test it as well, right? That is how we have to do it. But the more important thing I want to emphasize is the mindset of the individual, right? The person who's a data engineer, rather than looking this as an ETL and the data movement function, have to look that as a data product and see how they can understand the attributes of the data product and build on top of it, right? So that's how I think that it's very essential, A, to define data engineers at least in a broader scope, and B is to ensure that there's a mindset of the person and a bit of unlearning the data engineer does to make it successful. PK, your views?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think that holistic approach is very important, right? Again, back to an example with a human analogy, right? Now, say you get somebody to do or to get a open heart surgery done. So there is a cardiac surgeon who does the job for you. He's a specialist, right? You can relate him to be a data engineer or a ML engineer. So, but if you see the person as a whole, the patient, there are a lot of things, right? Pre-operative health, during the operation, what is his or her health, and post-operative health, and how is that person going to recover. So there should be someone who says he sees the patient as a whole, one entity. Think through these 3 or 4 stages, right? And because what the patient or the relatives of the patient dies, is interested is in that person. Okay, that person is investing in this particular surgery, so they want that person to live on for a few more years, right? That's when they get the benefit. So I would see this problem also something similar to that. So as Sriram told, it's a data product, right? Or it's a data solution. Now that is going to be consumed by someone, right? So we have to define the boundaries clearly on, okay, this is person A, person B, person C, these are the roles and responsibilities. But we have to work in close unison or cohesion, right? So that the end product of how good we call throughput, right? So in basic communication theory. So if there is one bottleneck somewhere, that impedes the whole throughput, right? So similarly, I think from end to end, it has to be a closely knit solution, right? So yeah, so coming back to the point, right? So yes, definitely it needs to be defined, the roles, but then there has to be an overarching management focus or technical management focus, which actually is on the solution there.
Yeah, I think you're right, because when you have the data product mindset, right, the entire team focuses on the features and the outcomes, and you work backwards, right? So be it design or testing or data or analytics, all of us are focused on what I am building is going to result in this kind of a feature and an outcome. That's why I said I'm overemphasizing, but overemphasizing on the mindset change of the team. So if you are leading, for example, at a team, you yourself have to go through that mindset change. Hey guys, look at this as a product. This is your role in this, but this is how you have to look into the whole process. That's what I think.
Yeah.
Correct. Talking of mindsets, okay, right? So you talked about ETL, and you had a little smile on your face when you said ETL, and that is where I think that the whole idea of whether I should have a career in data engineering or not, right? So one of the things that we have seen is that, so we at AIM, when we are doing research on some of the job studies, right, data engineers are some of the most vacant jobs that are there. And that mindset, right, there is some kind of a thing that the data engineering job is not as attractive. And in the talk before, while you were speaking before, you said that it is probably more difficult than a machine learning engineer. Why do you think that mindset still exists? Like, why, and how do we change it? Like, why, what can we, while HBR called data science the sexiest job of 21st century, now they're calling it data engineers, and all leaders are convinced. But I don't think people who are entering into the data science field, they are yet convinced. Do you agree? And how do we, if yes, then how do we change it?
Go first, please.
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah, I have that observation as well. It's like, see, you call it's an ETL job, it might actually, why is it ETL? But then I think the importance of, we have this old saying, right? I mean, 2 people were breaking a rock, and one was actually breaking it with a lot of frustration, and the other person knows that whatever rock he's breaking is actually going to get into a temple, right? So he has the whole end picture, right? So I think it is the way we position, like even if you look at Google or YouTube, you look at a definition of data engineer, it says it's basically preparing a data pipeline, focusing on ETL techniques. And if it's a big data, then you focus on Hadoop and Hive and all those kind of things. But that is kind of undermining the importance of that data engineering.
Totally agree.
Right?
I think it's a great point.
Yeah, that is not what data engineering is. I think it really blossoms into a great career when you look at the data engineering, the ML engineering, the data scientist part, all those working together, because it's very hard to draw a very distinct line. It can only be a dotted line or a bent line, right? Yeah. So I think that is what is actually.
I totally agree. And I'll just start with your question first. You said, can somebody make a career with data engineering? I'm doing an example of who has lived and breathed data engineering throughout my life. I'm going to live with data, right? So data engineering is here to stay. I think that's even the phrase itself is bias Kashyap, right? And we're calling them as scientists, and we're calling these cases engineers, right? I don't know, the bias starts there in my mind, right? Why this bias I don't understand, but I think that we should probably, the phraseology itself has to change. But beyond that, right? I think that in my real life example, in the organizations that I have worked for, when we even hire candidates from colleges, about 5,000, 6,000 people, 4,500 of them will say that I want to do data science work, right? We hire them as data engineers, they say I want to be data scientists. And we ask them why. They say that I can do cool stuff. I can do AI, build robots, and I can do all that cool stuff if I am doing machine learning. If I'm a data engineer, I cannot do that. That's the first thing. And they think that if you're a data scientist, you get more salary compensation than a data engineer, right? So the way we change that mindset is we tell them that data science is the end mile of the long data journey, right? Unless you know data, you cannot become a data scientist. And the best way for you to become a data scientist is to be a data engineer. The reverse is not true, right? You can always learn a few machine learning techniques and take the data and pull something out of it, right? My submission is that being a probably biased towards data engineering, I would say that at any point in time, anybody in the domain of data and machine learning, they should know data. And if they have to know data, they have to be data engineers. So I'll say long live data engineering.
Yeah, that emphasizes the importance of data as well. Right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we have heard many perspectives on data engineering. We have learned the evolving role, how the teams should be set up. One point you mentioned in the last question is data analytics professionals. Let's call it broader analytics professionals entering into the world of data are not finding this cool enough. How do you make? Do you have anything to say in terms of making it cool for these professionals?
I'll give one lighter answer and a more professional answer. You can have both. Let me give a lighter answer. Go to all the data scientists, give them data which is not prepared well, cooked well. Ask them to test the model. Then they know the pain of or the importance of data. They'll come running back here. Right? That's a lighter version of what I would say. I think all we data engineers should go and tell them, we are not here, you build a data model, machine learning models and see how it works. Right? Then the power of, as he said, the power of the foundation of data, I think that will come out, right? I think from a real professional answer for this is, we should find a better term than data engineer, right? Because somehow the word data engineer limits the nuts and bolts of taking the data and moving the data, but a data engineer does a lot more work than just engineering, right? And Kashyap, your name or great guys in bringing up new terms. I look forward to building those, but I think the word itself has to be made cool, and people who are data engineers, I think they have to relate the problem that they are trying to solve with real world. Right? Back to my vaccine example, right? So once you know that you are responsible for creating high quality vaccine batches, you know that you are making a difference to the world, right? The work that you do is not just engineering and moving the data and updating the data and managing the data, right? What you do makes an impact to the life, right? So they should feel good about the impact they create to the real world and everywhere, right? Not only in vaccine batches, we do data work that helps find out drug-seeking behaviors of patients. We build solutions that reduce clinical trials. And we build safer minds with data. A lot of data-related work that makes the world a better place. So if you are a data engineer, you have to raise your collar and say, the world that we live in is a better place because of me as a data engineer. That sense of pride you have to instill, and I still suggest slightly change the word data engineer to a better phrasing word.
Yeah, I think that's a very good suggestion as well. As a magazine, probably we can come up with a cooler phrase.
Yeah, I think we should. I honestly believe that because the word engineer limits what to do with data, right? And that's that kind of reflects on people as well. Everybody else says, oh, it's just an engineer. I mean, engineer is a great term. I'm an engineer as well. But engineer means just doing the nuts and bolts work and doing things, right? But data engineer does a lot more than that. That's my final submission. PK will have better.
Yeah, PK, any message for...
Yesteryears we had software developer, which nicely transitioned to software engineering, right?
Yeah.
So that's when people felt, oh, software engineer is a cooler designation to have. But just on these lines, right? I fundamentally believe, I think all of us believe, data is the strength of your solution actually depends on how good your data is. I cannot re-emphasize it more, right? So for people who are listening to this podcast, and I think there'll be a lot of aspirants who are listening to this, right? So let me put this in this perspective as well. So you can divide a data-based solution or a product into three phases. One is your data availability. Second is how you create a model for solving a particular problem. And the third is actually putting it into a solution, right? Which is basically the software engineering piece. If you look at the second one, now, how do you build a model? So we have various techniques. We have AutoMLs of the world, right? Which actually generate models for you in probably a couple of hours. So earlier years where data scientists used to sit for at least 8 to 12 weeks to actually come out with a model, AutoML can just quickly suggest within half an hour or a couple of hours, right? So that actually solves a problem. That's where we would get to see a lot of articles on is AutoML replacing the data scientists eventually, right? Now, if you look at the third part, which is basically the software engineering part, we have heard of GPT-3 and all those, right? You tell something, it writes the code for you. It's wonderful, right? You can actually, we have a lot of prototypes. So what I'm beginning to think is the second and the third part are going to get automated. Whether you like it or not, it's going to get automated. But data, there are techniques like SMORT or various numerical techniques or NLP augmentation, which is a glorified way of interpolation and extrapolation, things that we have learned in our mathematical schooling days, right? But that's not going to give you that extra amount of data. So we will always be in a world where there'll be a lot of restrictions about using somebody else's data. Data is a new oil. You have to pay a price for getting the right data. So that is where the importance of data and the importance of data engineering, right? It's really going to establish in the coming years. That's
fantastic. I think this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much, PK, for coming. Thank you so much, Sriram.
Thank you, Kashyap. It's been a great conversation as well.
I think it was a very relaxed conversation.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.